10 reasons why your gun could blow up and how to recognize if that were about to happen. But first, I have a quick story about this same thing that just about happened to a friend of mine. A lot of you guys know that I've been writing gun articles on my own website, guntradition.com, but I'm also writing articles for Backfire.tv, which is owned by a friend of mine, Jim Harmer, who runs the YouTube channel Backfire. Jim was out with his son in Idaho at a rifle shooting contest, and he had a Savage 110 ultralight in 270 Winchester. His son was competing and wanted to get in a little practice at the range before the event started. So he gets out his rifles and their hand-loaded ammunition, gets set up, and he's starting to get his practice in. Well, the first round out of the barrel, his dad noticed that he was reacting rather harshly to the recoil. He was reacting more than normal to the recoil, and he made a mental note of that. Well, a few rounds later, he commented, "This thing's kind of hurting my shoulder. I'm getting a little sore." Well, he never gets bothered by that recoil, so that was another strange thing. And Jim's thinking, "What's going on? What? This ain't normal." Okay, fast forward to the 20th round fired, and Jim heard his boy say, "Well, that's cool. The primer flew out." Okay, so that scared Jim pretty bad. He went over and took a look at the gun. Primer was blown out. Yeah, okay, they were hand loads. Figured he probably loaded them bad. Tossed all of them out, grabbed some Remington ammo right from the factory, put it in there. Same thing, maybe even slightly worse. Case split, was hard to eject, blew the primer out. Okay, so 10 reasons why your gun could blow up and how to recognize that it's going to happen. The first and most common reason that guns have a blow up, also known as a kaboom, well, that's from what they call a squib load. A squib load is a cartridge that had either no powder, which is most common, just the primer, or it had very little powder. Something happened with the powder charger or the powder measure on an automated system. It didn't get the powder it needed. And the bullet stays in the barrel. It gets stuck in the barrel and doesn't come out. Well, you can't fire one round down the barrel when one is stuck. That tends to create an explosion in the front of the chamber of your rifle, pistol, or shotgun. And that can happen with shotguns, believe it or not. Just a little bit different way. Squib loads are very dangerous. If you're ever shooting and you suddenly hear one round that was just really quiet or the recoil was really low, stop and check out the barrel. Make sure you don't have a barrel obstruction with a bullet stuck in the barrel. You don't want to lose your fingers or half your face. The second most common reason why guns have issues is using the wrong caliber of ammunition. The most common two of these is accidentally putting a 300 blackout in a 5.56 rifle, or accidentally putting a 20 gauge shotgun shell into a 12 gauge shotgun. And they're both a little different. Here's how that works. With the 300 blackout, it's often loaded in the same magazines as your 5.56 223 ammo for your ARs. It loads and feeds just with less capacity in the magazine. If you accidentally pick up the magazine loaded with the 300 blackout and put it in your 5.56, rack it in, it will go mostly into battery, and you can fire that round. The bullet will go partially into the barrel from the force of the explosion, and you stand a good chance of blowing up the action of that firearm. And I've seen it done where it takes off half of the hand and part of the wrist as well. It's a horrible, dangerous thing. Now with the shotgun, the bigger issue is when you put a significantly smaller shotgun shell in on accident. So usually this happens when an adult is hunting with a youth. Pop in a shell that's too small. Well, it's pointed downward quite often. That shell slides up into here. It doesn't stay where it's supposed to. It slides up in the barrel where it gets stuck. You pull back and shoot at a rabbit. All you hear is a click. Well, you forgot to load it. Open it up. I don't see a bullet right in there because that shell slid in. You pop the proper shell in, close it. Well, now you've got just like that squib load scenario where a full barrel obstruction, and if you pull that trigger, you are going to explode the gun. I've seen barrels that blew up like that. It's very dangerous. Number three. Number three is very uncommon, but I'm going to mention it anyways, and that is a double charge. On an automated system, for one reason or another, it is possible to get a double charge of powder in a cartridge, and it's easier to do while you're hand loading. You're going around, you get distracted. That's the word here. Distracted. That's when things happen, by the way, when you get distracted. You get distracted and put a double charge of powder in a cartridge, load it up, that thing, yes, that can certainly explode. If you ever notice your bullet just won't seat in your hand loads, maybe you put a double charge in there and there's no more room for the bullet to go down. Check things out. Number 4, it's basically the same thing, and that's an overcharge. This is easier to do if you have a problem with your measurer or with your scale, if you're not paying a whole lot of attention, lapse in judgment, and it even happens once in a very great while with automated systems in the ammo manufacturing industries, is you get too much powder, even just slightly too much. You can also use a wrong powder that has a higher burn rate than you're supposed to, and that gives you an overcharge. Overcharge creates too much pressure, and it can definitely explode your gun. Okay, number 5 is back to something more common, and that is a dirty barrel. If your barrel is very, very dirty, there's going to be more pressure in the chamber as the barrel is exiting. That's because the barrel is now being constricted in size, and there's a lot more friction in the barrel. The bullet's not going out as quick. You get a lot higher peak pressures, and peak pressure for longer, which is the more dangerous part. You get the highest level of pressure, you get that for a longer period of time in a very dirty barrel. And we're talking very dirty. Some of these guys that say they never have to clean their guns, this stuff can cause an issue. Now, so maybe you clean your barrel after every shooting session, but have you ever cleaned metal deposits out of there? Have you ever scrubbed it good? It happens quite a lot where you get a heavy copper, or depending on the bullets you're using, a heavy lead buildup that ends up plugging the rifling in your barrel. By doing that, you get a lot higher pressure down in that chamber. This takes an uncanny amount of metal fouling in that barrel for it to happen. I mean, like crazy amounts. I mean, if you shot 4, 5, 6,000 rounds through your barrel and never cleaned the metal out, okay, now you're getting to the point where you could potentially have some issues. A barrel or a bore copper solvent, which is, it's just a gun cleaner that's high in ammonia. Hoppy's number 9 bore cleaner works great. It's not super high in ammonia, but it's got that ammonia in it that really cuts out lead very well, and with just a little bit of work takes the brass and copper out of your barrels and chambers too. Don't use a nylon brush, use a copper or brass bore brush coated in that material, up and down a few dozen times, swab it out, repeat until everything comes back totally clear on the patch. Number 7, we're up to number 7. Number 7 is a tight chamber. When there's less room for the shell to expand under pressure in the chamber, you create significantly more pressure and higher pressure spike, a higher peak pressure. This is so rare. I've never actually heard of just this happening. I know of chambers that have been on the pretty darn tight side, but what it usually takes is, and it's the same for all of these issues, is several things stacking up. Once you get several of these issues stacking up together, that's generally what causes an issue. It's never just one thing. It's always an accumulation of errors that led up to something disastrous. Your chamber can get tighter if as the gun gets hotter. This one is well known. Guns are built with the tolerance to still operate this way, but if your chamber already started tight, this is one of those things where the tolerances start stacking and you can get out of your specification this way. If you already had a chamber that was on the tight side, and now the chamber gets hot, that chamber starts to, the metal expands, your chamber is tighter yet now. So as you fire your gun and it gets hot to the touch, you are firing with higher chamber pressure. If you let your gun sit out in the sun until it gets hot to the touch, you're firing with higher chamber pressure. If you let your gun sit out in the sun until it's hot, and then you fire it all out with a few mag dumps of ammo, now the chamber is really getting hot. If you combine that with maybe your ammunition was sitting in your hot car or out in the hot sun until it also got hot, now the ammo is expanded a little bit, the chamber's expanded a little bit, and if you already had a slightly tight chamber, see, this is where things start stacking up, and that's when the dangerous things happen, when you start stacking up errors like this. The carbon ring. Now this has been called the bane of bench shooters, and that is, it's just way up high in the chamber. You get a ring of carbon gunk buildup, and it's in a spot that's really hard to see. It's hard to get in and clean out even if you can see it, but it's hard to see because it's so far up. It's the last little crease in the metal, the last little ring crease before you get to the straight wall barrel, the last up part of the chamber where the case mouth goes, and that causes a tighter chamber. You're getting a tighter chamber and higher pressure. Excuse me. And that's not Black Rifle coffee. The carbon ring, this is one that's somewhat common yet. And like I said, it's hard to see. You gotta look in there really, really close with them, usually with a bright light. The way to clean it out is just with something like a Ballistol or Hoppy's No. 9 bore cleaner. You can use a mop just to smear it around in there, or a Q-tip, and then you usually got to use something like a mechanic's pick or a toothpick and just carefully scratch it out real good. Then you can get in there with your bore mop or a copper or brass brush and just scrub it out a little bit and swab it. Just make sure it's clean. This is a bigger issue if you clean your gun from the muzzle. If you start at the muzzle and push the cleaning rod down through versus starting in the action and going out, that tends to push gunk and grime just over that ledge in the back of the chamber where it has a more tendency to build up. Next up is the bolt face. The bolt face generally should never ever have an issue. The most common issues that the bolt face can cause leading to overpressuring is if it's very, very dirty, hey there, or if it's got a little shard of copper or brass from the bullet or casing that just lodged into an area, and what that does is it pushes the cartridge a little more forward. You get something between the bolt face and the cartridge, so it pushes it a little more forward, which causes head spacing issues, especially if you, once again, already have a tight chamber, or if you're maxing out the overall length or the overall head spacing space in your chamber. If your bolt face looks really dirty, just take a few minutes and scrub it off. It's not hard. You can do that with a toothbrush and a little Ballistol or Hoppy's No. 9. I prefer Hoppy's. It's a bit more of an aggressive cleaner, so I prefer that myself. Plus, I like the smell. The final point here, point number 10, is seating depth. And if you're hand loading, you'll notice a lot of my points here, I have a list, a lot of my points are from hand loading. That's because it takes a lot of care to be safe. If you do this wrong, you will kill yourself. Hand loading, you need the seating depth to be proper. If you load the bullet down too far, now there's not as much expansion space in the cartridge itself, and you're going to start out with a higher peak pressure, a higher pressure spike in the cartridge. Overall, the big point here is if you're hand loading, take super care, go slow, pay a lot of attention, and keep your gun clean. Now the signs for overpressuring, these are really, really easy to watch for. If your gun is recoiling more than normal, if you pick it up and you just notice the recoil's off for that ammo and weapon combination, stop and check things out, because that's a sign, for whatever reason, there's more pressure going on. There's more energy in the chamber, so there's more recoil. After that, the next thing that you'd notice is blown or damaged primers. The primer can blow out or become heavily damaged. That's the point at which you're going well beyond the specified pressures for that cartridge and getting into a dangerous zone. If you notice that the bolt is getting stuck, semi-automatics can get to the point where it won't rack out at all. And a bolt action can get to that point too. But if you're shooting your rifle, especially a bolt action, and you realize that when you go to lift that bolt and pull it back, it doesn't want to come easily, that means that that cartridge swelled up with pressure so much and it didn't contract back down because the pressure was in it too long. That means you're way overpressured and you're standing a chance of blowing things up. That's usually when you get to 25% over maximum pressures that you're really allowed to have. And that is the point at which usually you're hitting like 80 to 85,000 or even a little more sometimes. You're talking like 85,000 psi, which is way beyond what any of your rifles or pistols should ever shoot. That's to the point where you're about to blow off your hand or kill somebody. Now, with all this talk about guns exploding, this is why it's important to wear your safety glasses. I have two of them here. These ones I like better, but I have no idea what brand they are. Just any type of safety goggles, shooting glasses, even the stuff that we buy for the construction industry that I wear all the time, these crappy little plastic things. And that's why I like these ones better. That's why we wear the safety glasses. Protect your eyes with your glasses. I'm trying to remember that myself. And now that I have little kids that are just getting into shooting, it's suddenly a very big deal, and I'm trying to make a big point of it. Say, if you like this video, consider giving me a thumbs up and clicking that like button, because that's going to help me work towards monetization and get more good information out to you guys as quick as possible. Esther, go back in your room for 5 more minutes. I'm making a video, please, honey.
Who are you talking to?
My camera. Are you making coffee for me? I just had some.